St. Augustine Lighthouse began guiding ships at sea into shore in 1874, and as it stands today is the oldest brick structure in the city. The lightkeeper's house was added to the site in 1876 and was where the lightkeepers and their assistants lived and worked. Today, visitors from all over come to view this beautiful beacon, learn its fascinating history, and climb the 219 steps to the top. But others come for different reasons. They come to satisfy their curiosity about the paranormal, to discover if the stories they've heard are true and if it is possible that ghosts really do exist. Let's jump into 3 fascinating true horror stories of this token of terror in our lovely Florida.
Story 1. Whispers in the Dark. The Lost Sisters of St. Augustine. My name is John, and I worked as a night watchman at the St. Augustine Lighthouse in Florida. It was a job I had taken on out of necessity, with no real belief in the ghostly tales that swirled around the old lighthouse. But one moonlit evening, I found myself drawn to the lighthouse like a moth to a flame. I had just finished my rounds, and the night was clear, the stars above twinkling brightly. I decided to take a break, lighting a cigarette and sitting down on the weathered steps. The lighthouse stood tall, its beam cutting through the night, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. That's when I heard it. A faint, distant sound of children playing and laughing. I looked around, thinking perhaps some neighborhood kids had wandered too close, but there was no one to be seen. The laughter continued, growing louder and echoing through the night. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the wind or my own imagination. I went back to smoking, my mind filled with skepticism, not knowing what to make of the eerie playfulness in the stillness of the night. A minute passed, and the laughter returned. The voices of the children seemed closer now, and their laughter had taken on a mischievous, almost sinister quality. I dropped my cigarette and glanced around, the shadows of the lighthouse stretching ominously. The laughter echoed in my ears, growing louder and more unsettling. Fear clutched my heart as I stood frozen on the steps. I couldn't explain it. The laughter was no longer the innocent playfulness of children. It had transformed into something eerie and unsettling, something that sent shivers down my spine. As I descended the lighthouse steps, the creepy laughter continued to follow me, growing more intense. The beam of the lighthouse flickered and cast eerie, elongated shadows that seemed to dance in time with the haunting sounds. Finally, as I reached the base of the lighthouse, I stumbled into the moonlight. The creepy laughter faded, and the world around me fell silent once more. I stood there, my mind awash with uncertainty, not knowing if what I had experienced was real or merely a trick of my tired mind. The legend of the 2 sisters and the haunting laughter had become an indelible part of my memory. The lighthouse stood as an enigmatic guardian of its own secrets, and I was left with a sense of awe and trepidation. In the end, I couldn't be sure if the lighthouse's history and the echoes of the past were playing tricks on my mind, but the eerie laughter in the dark remained etched in my memory, like an enigma that could never be unraveled. As I walked away from the lighthouse, the memory of that night clung to me. I couldn't shake the feeling of hearing those sounds. The lighthouse's tales, once mere stories, had woven themselves into my reality, leaving me with more questions than answers. And as I turned back to steal one more glance at the towering structure against the night sky, I wondered if the lighthouse itself held the answers to the mysteries that had eluded me that moonlit evening. Story 2. Blue Chill in the Blue Room. My name is Sarah, and I worked as a night watch at the St. Augustine Lighthouse for years. The stories, the legends, the ghostly tales, they were all part of the lighthouse's history, like the very bricks and mortar. I had always been a skeptic, dismissing the paranormal whispers that echoed through the old tower, until that fateful night. The Blue Room had an uncanny reputation, believed to be a hotbed for strange occurrences. Visitors claimed abrupt drops in temperature, odd drafts, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. And on this night, as I entered the Blue Room, I couldn't deny the eerie sensation that hung in the air. I took a cautious step forward, brushing my fingers along the peeling cerulean paint that coated the room's walls. The whispers began, soft and indistinct, like a chorus of hushed voices just beyond my hearing. I rubbed my temples, attributing the strange atmosphere to fatigue. But then I saw it. A man, dressed in a tattered blue coat, stood in the corner. His form seemed to waver, as if he were composed of mist and shadow. He had a forlorn expression in his eyes, and his spectral gaze locked with mine. I stumbled backward, gasping, but as I rubbed my eyes and looked again, he was gone. I couldn't have imagined it. I was sure of that. My heart raced as I left the blue room and sought out my colleague, Mark, who was on shift with me that night. I recounted the bizarre encounter to him, but he dismissed it as a product of my tired mind. He suggested that I take a break, assuring me that everything would be fine. I hesitantly agreed and went to the break room to collect my thoughts. But when I returned, Mark's face had turned ashen. His eyes were wide with fear, and he pointed a trembling finger toward the blue room. There, in the doorway, stood the man in the tattered blue coat, his spectral form wavering. We both stumbled backward, our voices trembling as we tried to make sense of what we were witnessing. In a panic, we called the local authorities, our hands shaking as we tried to convey the unearthly presence in the lighthouse. But, as the minutes passed again, nothing seemed to be there, leaving behind an empty room. When the authorities arrived, they found no evidence of any intruders or paranormal activity. They exchanged knowing glances, clearly doubting our account. We were left with a lingering sense of disbelief, wondering if we had truly experienced something beyond our comprehension. The blue room and the man in blue had etched themselves into our memories, leaving us with a truth that we couldn't explain. We were now among the few who had witnessed the lighthouse's haunting, and we would forever carry the weight of that eerie encounter, even if nobody believed us.
The Shadowed Lighthouse Keeper. As a visitor to the St. Augustine Lighthouse, I was eager to explore the history and the ghostly legends that surrounded it. The tales of Peter Rasmussen, a former keeper whose apparition was said to wander the grounds, were particularly intriguing. I had heard descriptions of him as a shadowy figure in period clothing, and I couldn't resist the temptation to see for myself. It was a quiet evening when I arrived at the lighthouse, the sun slipping below the horizon. The warm glow of the setting sun gave way to the inky darkness of night. The lighthouse's beacon pierced the blackness, casting an eerie but inviting ambiance. As I wandered the lighthouse grounds, a chill swept over me. I brushed it off as a product of the sea breeze and the approaching night. But then, on the lighthouse steps, I saw him. A shadowy figure indeed. He stood at the entrance, his form obscured by the dim light. His attire was distinctly outdated, a uniform that harkened back to another era. I watched, captivated, as he ascended the steps, his movements deliberate and silent. I felt a shiver of fear race down my spine. My curiosity warred with my instinct to flee, but the latter prevailed and I took a step backward. The Phantom Keeper extended a hand, palm up, in a silent gesture that seemed to beckon me forward. But I was too overwhelmed with fear to heed the call. The chill in the air intensified and I found myself trembling. In that moment, I realized that I was too frightened to take another step. The vision, if that's what it was, dissipated as quickly as it had come. I found myself standing alone on the lighthouse grounds, the Phantom Keeper no longer in sight. The night had returned to its calm, mysterious stillness. As I left the lighthouse that night, I couldn't deny the inexplicable experience I had just lived through. The stories of Peter Rasmussen and the Shadowed Keeper, once merely legends, had taken on a new dimension of reality in my mind. The St. Augustine Lighthouse and its history had imprinted themselves on my memory, forever leaving me with a sense of wonder and intrigue.